All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Bienvenidos a todos.
Just give another minute for everybody to join, and then we'll get started.
Vamos a dar unos minutos para que todos se unan y luego vamos a empezar.
Okay, it looks like the admissions have slowed down, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the Warehouse Working Group meeting for February 5th. Before we get started, I wanted to turn the presentation over to our interpreter, Vicky, who will be providing some brief instructions before we get going. So, Vicky.
Yes, and I will give the instructions first in Spanish. Bienvenidos a los que se han unido a esta reunión inicial del grupo de trabajo de almacenes ahora para el 5 de febrero. Si ustedes quieren, si ustedes están utilizando una computadora portátil o computadora de escritorio, favor de localizar el icono con figura de globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla cuando este aparezca en un minuto y luego pulsen en Interpretación del lenguaje, Language Interpretation, y seleccionen el idioma español. Si están conectándose desde su teléfono, iPad o dispositivo similar, buscan el menú con los tres puntitos en la esquina superior del lado derecho de su pantalla y pulsen Interpretación del lenguaje, otra vez Language Interpretation y luego Español. Esto permite que escuchen a la traducción al español con un 80% de volumen y el audio en inglés se escuchará al fondo con un 20% de volumen. También tienen la opción de apagar el audio en inglés pulsando Mute Original Audio ubicado en el mismo menú donde eligieron el idioma español. Gracias. Eso concluye. Ahora paso al inglés. For those of you who are joined in English and want to be able to understand anything that is said in Spanish, you would need to, when they appear in a few moments, a globe icon will appear at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have a laptop or a desktop, you would click there and choose English. If you're using a phone, an iPad, or a similar device, you'll look for the three dots on the top right of your screen, click there. Also, you'll see the language interpretation and choose English. This concludes the instructions for the channels, both the English and the Spanish, and we'll wait for those to be activated so we can start the meeting. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Vicky. And I see the interpretation channel has shown up, so feel free to make your selection at this time. With that, we'll go to the next slide. So before we begin, we did just, as always, have a few meeting announcements. Everyone except the presenter is muted until called upon by the host. Please save your questions and comments until the end of each section that we will be presenting. Interpretation is available, as you heard. And finally, we'll be recording and posting the recording of the district's on the district's YouTube page following this meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, I think we have.
Say, Nick, do I have the right presentation? I might not.
Yeah, I think we might be using a previous version.
All right, let me keep talking and I'm gonna see if I can pull up the right presentation.
Sure.
Apologies, folks.
No problem. So I'm just going to briefly go through the agenda for today. You probably saw a little bit of it on the English side, and the version that Kathy's going to be bringing up has the Spanish translation. But today we're going to be going over, I'll just briefly go over what we're going to be covering in today's presentation. We're going to go through attendance and introductions of district staff and meeting participants. We'll do a quick recap of our January warehouse working group meeting. We're going to have a interesting presentation from Caltrans staff on the appointment system pilot project at the Calexico East Port of Entry, which we heard a little bit about. We kind of summarized a little bit at our previous warehouse working group meeting, but we're going to have a nice presentation from Caltrans staff on that today. We're then going to be devoting a lot of time to an incentive program listening session where we're interested in hearing more from our warehouse entities, trucking companies, trying to get some feedback from those folks in particular that hopefully are joining our meeting today and have some ideas and perspectives about what an incentive program might look like here at San Diego APCD in relation to reducing emissions from truck vehicle visits. And then finally, we're going to attempt to do a training video or show a training video from South Coast that they produced a few months ago that explains how they count truck trips. And we found this video particularly interesting. So we wanted to at least bring it to everyone's attention and maybe perhaps talk about it to see if that is, if there's any questions in relation to it. And time permitting, we'll have time for any non-agenda items. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I did just want to take attendance at the meeting. I'm going to go through the list and see if we can, I'll just kind of go through by name. I'll go ahead and go through the APCD staff that I see on the list too. So no need for everyone at APCD to introduce themselves, but I see, I'm just going to go through as I see it on the list here. I see Janet McHugh from APCD, Kathy Keehan from APCD. We have our interpreter. We have Alejandra Mir Etaran from Otay Chamber of Commerce. I see Alfonso Esquer Milian. Alfonso, if you could provide your affiliation, that would be great. Is it Esquer, the trucking company, I'm assuming?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I am on behalf of our trucking company, Binational Services. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. I see Andrew Aguilar from NASCO. Angelica from Carrasco from CARB, Ariel Fiddledy from CARB, Claire Garcia. Claire, if you could provide your, if you could unmute and provide your affiliation, that would be great. Or group that you're representing, or?
Yes, I'm with ChargePoint.
ChargePoint, great, thank you. I see Craig Benedetto. David Wick. David, if you could unmute to provide your affiliation or group that you're representing.
Yeah, David Wick. I represent National Enterprises, which is a landlord developer in Otay Mesa.
Great, thank you. See Davin Widrow from DOJ. Derek Robinson. Derek, if you could provide your affiliation, that would be great.
Hi, yes, Derek Robinson with the Center on Policy Initiatives in San Diego.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Joelle Howe from CARB, Jose Marquez from Caltrans, Caitlin Arduino. I recognize the name, I just can't remember the affiliation. Caitlin, if you could provide your affiliation, that would be great.
Yeah, Murphy Development Company, industrial developer, longtime Otay Mesa.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for joining again. let's see, Wendy Ostapuk from, I can't read the name, is it US Navy?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Margarita Nunez from Caltrans, Michelle Guyron from Port of San Diego, Mike Watt from San Diego APCD, Nathaniel Tate from CPI, Nicholas Powell from EHC, Paula Forbes from APCD, Randy Consolation from APCD, Tim Garrett from Sandag, Tom Simmons. Tom, if you could provide your affiliation, that would be great.
Yeah, you bet, Nick. Tom Simmons. I'm with Majestic Realty. Like Caitlin and David, also a warehouse developer and owner in the Otay Mesa area.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining. And Zach Friedlander. Zach, if you could provide your affiliation, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, hi there. I'm a senior associate with TRC Companies. We're an environmental consulting firm.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody I missed in going through the list of attendees today? If not, then we could certainly get it back around to whoever I missed later on. Okay, great. So I will now, I think now we can get into the slides. I do see, Alejandra, your comment about the people being able to, there may have been some miscommunication about what can go in what order in the agenda. I wanted to maybe perhaps ask right now to Jose and maybe the folks at Caltrans, how do you think, would you be able to stay on a little longer if we reshuffled the agenda a little bit, or what's kind of your availability at this point in terms of the listening? Our listening session probably is going to go around 45 minutes. So I want to make sure, I wanted to see if we could maybe, what do you guys think would be best, I guess? What is your availability in terms of the folks at Caltrans?
I mean, I can stay. I don't know about Maggie, but.
Okay. What time, Alejandra, what time does everyone need to kind of take off on your end? Because I do want to get to, I do want to get the feedback from the folks that you've brought on today.
Yes, thank you. I believe Alfonso is the only person representing a trucking company, and he, I believe, has to leave like in 30 minutes. Is that correct, Alfonso? You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, sorry to be forced to leave, but something that I have to go into came to me, so I cannot stay over that 30 minutes. Sorry.
And I know David and Tom are also here on that particular incentive feedback. We are waiting for someone from Casas on the operating side, and hopefully they'll join in. At this point, last time we didn't have anyone representing landowners and no trucking companies and no operators. So we're still missing operators, but at least we have a trucking company and landowners.
Right. And I do appreciate you kind of spreading the word and getting those, as many folks as we can here into this session. So I do appreciate that. And I do, we do want to hear specifically from the trucking companies, especially in that, in this portion. So Jose, if you're okay with it, I would like to maybe shuffle the agenda a little bit to be able to hear the feedback that we've been wanting to get from a trucking company on this. So if you're okay with that, and I do apologize for kind of shuffling the deck here. I think we might jump to that item instead, if that's okay. All right, so I think we'll probably, Kathy, I think if we want to jump down to, let's see, slide, let's see, yeah, here we go, slide 8, okay. So Randy, I think we'll go ahead and just, we're gonna cover the first portion, maybe just a slide or two, but we definitely want to hear more from the folks in the room about what we're thinking in terms of this incentive program. So Randy, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you if you're okay with kind of shifting gears a little bit, and then we'll go back to the Caltrans presentation after
Sure,
that,
no
after
problem.
this session.
Okay, thank you, Nick. This part of the presentation is what we're calling Incentive Program Listening Session. The objective of this session is to obtain stakeholders' feedback to help conceptualize what an incentive program for warehouses may look like. The goals of an incentive program are to enhance the number of ZEV truck visits at local warehouses and to incentivize action that could support possible regulatory ISR approaches for warehouses. Topics that have been presented and discussed during prior meetings include grants to purchase zero-emission trucks and infrastructure, rebates to reimburse for potential charging costs at public charging facilities, monetary program to encourage warehouse owners to contract with trucking companies with ZEV equipment, reduced regulatory fees for purchasing, using ZEVs and infrastructure, ZEV truck pilot approach for warehouse entities, and ZEV truck trip visit program for trucking companies and/or warehouses. Concerns about incentive programs include availability of ZE equipment. Some programs require scrappage of old vehicles, minimum California operation requirements for fleets based in Mexico, preferred approach for trucking companies versus warehouse operators may be different, incentive frequency, duration, and type, community steering committee and CARB review and approval will be needed for community identified projects. And are there other issues for us to consider? Next slide, please. The following are some possible strategies for consideration. Replacement of existing diesel trucks with ZEV trucks, providing incentives for ZEV truck trips to and from warehouses, leveraging existing incentive programs, for example, California HVIP, trucking as a service opportunities, infrastructure, and what are some other strategies that should be included on this list? Next slide, please. To help facilitate the discussion, please think about the following questions. If you received a ZEV truck for free, would you take it and would you use it? Is your company unwilling to consider purchasing a ZEV truck, even if free, until sufficient infrastructure is installed, either on-site or publicly available? If your company had infrastructure available to charge adequately, would purchasing a ZEV truck be a more realistic option? Which incentive strategy would work best for trucking companies to procure a ZEV truck? Which incentive strategy would work best for warehouse operators with trucks to procure a ZEV truck? Would an incentive strategy that monetizes ZEV truck visits rather than ZEV equipment be successful in attracting ZEV truck visits to warehouses? And is there a preferred approach from the community or industry representatives?
Great, thanks, Randy. And I would just add to these questions, and we are hoping to hear from our warehouse friends and operators, owners, trucking companies in particular on these questions. While we have them here, we are very interested in hearing what are your thoughts, what are your ideas in how APCD is going to design an effective program that can help you and your company to procure ZEV trucks. You know, we are looking to do an incentive program. We want to do one that's going to work. And so that's why we're here. We have an open session today to hear from you all to see what would work. And, we're hoping to get any feedback we can so we can design an effective program that will meet the needs with that goal in mind. So with that, I will go ahead and leave the floor open to any and all who would like to have some thoughts in relation to these questions, or if you have information that is applicable to your company that you would think would provide some value, we are open to hearing that as well.
Don't everybody talk at once.
Nick, hi, this is Tom Simmons with Majestic Realty. I thought it might be helpful just for an explanation purpose based upon our understanding of, the objectives, which are great objectives, and just, how the practical application we're finding as industrial warehouse owners down in the Otay Mesa region. We develop these properties and we offer them for lease. Our portfolio in Otay Mesa is a little over 1 million square feet, separated over several different warehouse buildings. These buildings are occupied by local businesses. Those local businesses are primarily customs brokers that are handling transactions, cross-border transactions, and also third-party logistics firms who will have a customer that is typically in Baja that is manufacturing goods that are then coming for the American consumer. These tenants of ours typically do not have their own fleets. They will have a arrangement with an electronics manufacturer in Tijuana, for instance, and they're helping to broker, audio video equipment or something like that, get it across the border for distribution throughout the United States. So that's coming from a driver on the Mexican side who makes the crossing at Otay and brings it into one of my warehouses, in which case it gets unpacked and stored as inventory until it gets loaded onto another American tractor trailer that is then distributed to Chicago, Boston, Dallas, Seattle, you fill in the blank. So in most instances, in our experience in the portfolio, we do not have any of the operators who are in the warehouses who are actually controlling the fleets, because they're handling business for their customers, as opposed to, it's not a situation where, I'm just going to throw an example, Kraft Foods is the tenant in the warehouse, and Kraft Foods would have a facility, let's say in Ensenada, that they're making who knows what, and then they're bringing it to distribute in the grocery store shelf. In this case, most of our customers that are the tenants, they in turn have several different customers who are conducting business in Mexico and then bringing it over to the American consumer. So I think as you're looking through a program, the recommendation from the warehouse owner would be to maybe take a careful look at who is actually operating the trucks that are in the area, because oftentimes it's not a national fleet. It's not a Schneider. It's not a Daniel B. Hastings. It's not a Warner Trucking. In most cases, they're individual operators on the Mexican side, and then there'll be contract drivers on the US side. So I think that's just a helpful glimpse of reality as far as when you're looking to design an approach. From what we've found is the trucks that are coming in and out are not the same label on any given day.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That's really helpful information to understand the whole dynamic of what is going on down there. I had a follow-up question, maybe if you know it. Are these, in particular on that facilitation, I guess that happens on, well, I guess both the Mexican side and the US side, are these contracts typically in place, or is it kind of like on a as needed basis for procuring those trucking services? Meaning, I imagine every company kind of works a little different, I'm guessing, but is it kind of done on a truck by truck, load by load basis, or do these customs companies and third-party logistics companies have contracts in place to have those services?
Yeah, great question, Nick. In most instances, the manufacturer, if you will, on the Mexican side, will go out with a contract for a for a term, a period of 3, 5, 7 years, whatever it might be, usually on the shorter term, with these customs brokers to help them facilitate getting their product across the border. So in this case, they'll have, one of our tenants could have 4 or 5 or frankly, 40 or 50, contracts with entities that are manufacturing in Mexico. And then they will go ahead and sign those contracts for a fixed term. And then they go look for warehouse space to be able to make sure they have sufficient floor space for whatever it is they're bringing across the border.
Nick, maybe we could get Alfonso, I think it was, who to talk a little bit about the trucking side of that relationship.
Alfonso, I see your hand.
Thank
up. Yeah,
you.
that would be great.
Following up on your comments, I totally agree with the saying that who knows who's going to be the carrier coming to drop or pick up a load. A big bulk of the loads will be handled by certain carriers, but depending on destinations and how the delivery route is structured, it's not only difficult to predict who's coming to deliver, it's also difficult to predict who's going to go pick up to then deliver cross-country US. Because in the current world, in the current shipping world, if I may use that wording, 3PL companies play a big role on who's the carrier. And it's sometimes very difficult to determine who's going to be coming. That carrier might be coming from a certain logistic company, but not necessarily out of the same fleet. So being able to determine who's going to be the carrier ahead of time. I don't know if you heard me, because I'm going through the border as we speak.
All but that last little bit.
Okay, good. So you heard me. That's the goal. Thank you.
Yeah, we were able to hear, I think, 95% of it. So I think we got the gist of it. I guess another question for you, Alfonso, I would have is, and clearly in this dynamic of the truck going across the border, gets to a warehouse on this side, and then it takes another fleet, picks it up and takes it wherever it needs to go, and perhaps long distances. I mean, how, in terms of a zero emission truck component, it would seem like the cross-border trucks would be a ripe opportunity, given that they don't go very far in terms of charging and mileage. If you were to design a program that would potentially go after some companies, either like your company or potentially other companies, to have them get into an electric truck or incentivize them to get an electric truck, would it make sense to just provide them a truck and then I mean, what kind, it seems like charging might be an issue in that kind of case that I'm thinking, especially if a lot of these trucks are kind of domiciled across the border. I'd be interested in any feedback you might have and what you think might be the best way to get perhaps those trucks that are going through and sitting in the line to get across the border. What would work best? Is it a per truck incentive? Is it an equipment incentive? Is it infrastructure? Is it all of the above?
I think we need to do kind of like a copy paste program from US to be happening in Mexico, talking about electricity being available to use it and charge trucks. The trucks to be replaced and be used. As we are right now, aren't.
Oh, we lost you a little bit, Alfonso.
Yeah.
I think Alfonso is trying to make the point that Baja California is not as equipped as California in terms of the grid, the charging stations, I mean, is I think his point, and I believe, let's see if he's back. While he's back, we were discussing this and the potential warehouse fee, I should say, in our board meeting, and I did get some good feedback from some of the 3PLs, and their point was that the EPA, I believe, and I'll put the link, already has a program where companies are measuring their carbon footprint, which is more of a standardized measure that companies worldwide are doing, and it might make more sense for companies to be measured that way versus like the program that the Inland Empire has it's like a different program and it's measured by zero emission trips when there's so many other factors that contribute to carbon footprint.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Alejandra. That's something we can certainly look at as a possibility. Understandably, I think with this particular effort, we're also looking at potentially other reductions that we potentially could get from either a regulatory or non-regulatory program. So that includes NOx reductions, it includes PM reductions in addition to carbon, which I think from our perspective, I guess at the local air district, we don't really have the authority from our agency's perspective to really get too far in the regulatory authority of greenhouse gases and carbon. That's kind of left up to land use authorities, but it's certainly something we can look at in relation to the entire effort that we're doing.
Well, Alejandra, I have a follow-up question for you on that. And I know, David, you have your hand up. I'm gonna get to you, I promise. I just wanted to ask a quick question. Are you thinking that the analysis should be over the entire warehouse operation for emissions? Or I guess I'm curious about what that EPA measurement entails.
I just added the link of that calculator that my board member sent me, so you can take a look at it. But I believe it's, I mean, I don't know if you could measure the local warehouse or the worldwide company, or you could divide it. I'm assuming you can divide it, but it just makes more sense that there are already environmental standards out there that companies are using. Might as well use those, and then like all the suppliers can use them as well from the transportation companies. It might just be a more efficient way to measure carbon footprint. I mean, I understand that you only I guess have jurisdiction over certain pollutants, but I guess the whole measurement is important, and these companies are already doing, some of them, so much to address it, some of them are not. But anyway, I did put the link there.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think looking at the entire supply chain really is the idea of I think also what you're kind of going after is looking at the reductions that could happen beyond GHG. It could be NOx, but looking at a supply chain aspect, if I'm understanding right. So looking at that is in relation to this warehouse effort too, I think it is the comment. So correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Yeah, we can certainly look into that. It's a possibility. Easier said than done, but that's a good comment.
Well, especially because companies are already measuring it, and I mean, and it's like a global or a national standard versus creating one, which might not make that much sense.
And are a lot of border fleets participating in this? I mean,
I don't know.
You said some are, but some aren't.
This is just one really large 3PL that's in Otay Mesa, and they're a large company and a global company. This is DSV. But no, I mean, I'm assuming the smaller local firms are not doing it, but it's something, since the calculator and the standards already exist, it's something that he was explaining to me that they are now requiring their vendors to be part of that and measure their carbon footprint. So it's sort of like a trend, and it's something, again, that already exists.
Good to know.
Yeah, thank you for putting that on our radar. I see David's hand up. Sorry for the delay there. Sorry, David.
No, Nick, thank you, and Kathleen, and thank everybody for their input. To take off from what Tom was saying about the warehouse space, we ground lease about 900 acres in Otay Mesa for drop yard space. So we don't have a building, but we have yards that logistic companies use to bring product across the border. So our 900 acres, in fact, Esquerra is one of our tenants in one of our business parks. And so a lot of truckers, a lot of product that goes across the border northbound doesn't get unloaded to a warehouse. It just goes to a drop yard, and then that drop yard drops the product, and then the product is distributed throughout the United States. So another truck may bring it to someplace else. Although some of our tenants, they have their own fleet of trucks like Esquerra that they bring the product to other parts of the country. That's kind of rare because most of our tenants, XPO and IMEX and these different folks, logistic companies, they contract with independent truckers to bring the product to other parts of the country. And so if you have a program, if you want to have a zero emission vehicle program or grant money, you should target those independent truckers that work for all these huge logistic companies, because what I've seen in the past when they came out with CARB compliant type grants, a lot of the big companies took advantage, but a lot of the small guys didn't understand how to apply and how to go through the process to get a rebate or a truck for free or whatever. And to your point, Nick, which is, spot on, if you could create a program where these independent truckers could get zero emission trucks or vehicles that cross the border, because most of the time they're just waiting in line. And then they crawl and they crawl and they crawl to get to the port of entry, then to go through customs and inspections and etc. Then come northbound to the yard or to the warehouse in Tom's case, or in Caitlin's case. And then they drop off the finished product, and then they take the raw material that came to the yard from the port of Long Beach or Los Angeles and bring it across the border back to the plant. And they try to do that 4 times a day, plus or minus, depending on how efficient the border is. But if you could capture that group of folks, you would significantly decrease the emissions in Otay. But somehow with these huge logistic companies, they don't own a fleet of trucks. They just contract with the independent truckers. In some way, if you can tap into those folks and help them get the grant money to get the trucks that are zero emission, then that would be a great thing for the community.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's really helpful information. That's really useful for us to know.
I have a quick follow-up.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ken.
On that, David, do you happen to know if those big, I've heard a couple of models for the truck hiring or the driver hiring. Sometimes they'll hire small companies that own those trucks as the small companies. Sometimes the company will own the truck and lease it to drivers. Do you know if those two business models are working in Otay, or is it strictly independent truckers own a truck or 2 trucks or 3 trucks and are bidding on that business?
It's everything you just mentioned, because we have tenants like SDS, Samsung's logistics arm, that brings all the finished product from the plant in Tijuana across the border. They hire independent truckers who own their trucks to bring it to their yard that we lease them in Otay. But then there's situations like you just described where like Esquerra owns their trucks and they hire employees to drive those trucks. Now there's I know XPO, which is now, what's the new company?
STG.
STG, they hire what you just described there, where they'll have truckers that are independent that own their trucks, but they also own some trucks themselves, and they will hire a contractor to drive the truck. Or like you just described, they find a company that has 6, 7, 8, 10 trucks, and they hire them to do a specific contract. So it's everything and above. And it's very interesting once you get to know the dynamics, because as I said a moment ago, I don't know, and maybe Alejandra and maybe Tom or Caitlin would know, I don't know how many logistic companies bring the product across the border to a warehouse and unload it. I think that when they're in the warehouse, they may be doing final assembly or somehow combining it with some of their product, or there may be situations that they actually do a cross dock and they unload it, then another truck comes, picks it up. But from our experience, again, we lease 900 acres. That's a lot of square feet of drop yard space, and they're packed. And the trucks are dropping the trailers to be picked up by some other truck to bring it to someplace else. So.
Sorry, I keep having more follow-up questions. I'm hoping other people will chat here too. Just curious, David, do you happen to know what percentage of trips from your drop yards go stay in San Diego County versus go up into kind of our close by South Coast neighbors, and how much of that goes out like interstate?
I would suspect of our tenants that we have, we probably have 130 different tenants of our 900 acres, leasing anything between 1 acre up to 40 acres. 99% leave the county. Now, are they going to Orange County, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Riverside, Las Vegas, Phoenix? But I would say 99% are leaving the county. So that's why a charge has to be for a couple 100 miles. I mean, it's like a diesel tank. I'm not sure how far on 100 gallons of diesel you get, but I would say you have to have the equivalent of a charge because they are leaving the region. That's where Nick's comment was interesting. Never thought about it like he mentioned, to create a program of just bringing it from the plant, the Maquiladora in Mexico, to the drop yard or the warehouse. That would be an interesting program, because we have had, not to change the subject, we have had thoughts of creating a conveyor belt system crossing the border that would put the finished good on the conveyor belt. So obviously you got to be dry goods, and have it cross the border and have customs and border inspection so there's no contraband, and then come to the United States, and then from there have a cross-dock facility to bring it to other parts of the country. But your program, which you're mentioning there, is almost like a shuttle. And that actually, I think, would be very interesting. And I think Alejandra would be someone who would be interested in something like that.
I think Mike has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Real quick on just on that note, I was wondering about, one of the things we've heard a lot about as this zero emission truck technology kind of continues to grow is this trucking as a service model, right? And thinking about some of the challenges that we're aware of with charging infrastructure on the south side of the border, would some sort of trucking as a service kind of model be a potential option where, trucks that are coming across the border in a diesel truck would be able to, pick up a zero emission truck on the US side, make whatever delivery they need to make on the US side in that zero emission truck before, dropping that truck back off and going back down south. Or, if they're making 3-4 runs a day, utilizing that zero emission truck to make those, 3 to 4 runs a day, and then dropping that truck back off, with whoever the owner is on the US side, so that I can charge overnight and be ready for the next day's round trip. There's obviously some complications with that when you're talking about, cross-border traffic, but just kind of thinking out loud about, potential concepts that might be worth considering. Wanted to see if anybody had any either experience with that trucking as a service kind of lease model, or thoughts on how that may or may not work with zero emission trucks at the border.
Mike, I can tell you that I spoke to a company that provides truck as a service, And I explained the cross-border like phenomenon, and he was like, no, I don't think we could do that at the border because there's like all these insurance issues that they don't want their trucks going into Mexico. And then most of the manufacturers and the supply chain have what's called CTPAT, which is a federal certification based on security standards that the company would not have, like the truck as a service company, and the entire like supply chain needs to be part of that. But what we did suggest to CARB is that the regulations for truck as a service should be modified to allow a cross-border component in the case that we are unable to find companies to charge in Mexico. Maybe that could be a solution, but the way the regulations stand today, they do not include any kind of consideration for a cross-border program for truck as a service, to my knowledge. I mean, and I'm certainly no expert.
Thanks, Alejandro. That's helpful. Yeah, it might be, at some point, good for us to connect with a couple of these trucking as a service operators and bounce some ideas off of them. So maybe we'll reach out to you to see if we can get some contact information. But thanks, I appreciate that insight.
Yeah, I had one other question, maybe just for the group as a whole, and Mike kind of hit a little bit on it as a trucking as a service, as a potential model that, is out there and we've heard about a little bit. At least on the US side, it seems to be picking up some steam in some circles, especially around the port area. It sounds like that could be more of a model. My question, I guess, if for the folks that know, one thing we're struggling a little bit is if trucking as a service can't work, and if we were to incentivize through a monetary program, be it a large chunk of money to purchase a truck, or potentially to look at a per trip visit, and do a little bit of monetary benefit at a time, either to the trucking company or warehouse owner or whoever it may be. Which of those might push a company over the edge to say, yes, I can do this? Understanding that, or the other option is infrastructure. Would it be better to get an incentive program in place to get the infrastructure first and then worry about the trucks later? Or, that's one thing that I think we're struggling with at APCD, to see what would work best. And I see Tom's hand up. Go for it, Tom.
Yeah, Nick, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The infrastructure component is probably one of the most important paths to take. I noticed when you were doing introductions, one group I did not hear, a constituent, would be SDG&E. They have, and hopefully it's just short term, but they have some significant constraints right now on being able to deliver enough power to that area. And this actually kind of ties into what Kathleen had been asking previously, just to give an example. So, and Alejandro mentioned it, the Mexican dray carrier can only go so far into the United States before they essentially have to stop because they've hit the halo, which is why there aren't any long-haul Mexican truckers in the United States, and why markets like Otay Mesa or El Paso, Texas, or Laredo, Texas are such large warehouse centers, because that driver does need to stop and drop his trailer and essentially go back home, which is his business model. And then the U.S. driver cannot get appropriate insurance to travel deep into Mexico. So as a result, these cross-border markets exist because of some of these constraints. And one of the earlier questions, that Kathleen had mentioned, and I can give an example, is, Toyota has a plant that is down in Baja, and when they manufacture parts, they send them across the border. One of our customers has the Toyota account and stores those parts, and those parts go across the United States. So some go to a Toyota service yard in Kearney Mesa, but some go to a Toyota service location, presumably in Detroit or in Cleveland, Ohio. So, the diaspora of those parts, once they are manufactured in one location, then come over to service the greater United States, their final destination is anyone's guess, but it will be various locations throughout the United States. So there's two different components in looking at the ZEV. Is the infrastructure will be very important to incentivize the US driver to want to adopt zero emission vehicles leaving the border throughout the United States, because of the only location they can go to is 300 miles or whatever the length, the charge they can get, and they don't have the appropriate infrastructure to continue along to Cleveland, then they're not serving Toyota the way they're supposed to be. The Mexican side is a much bigger undertaking, because that involves, the other side of the border sometimes just gets forgotten about, and trying to incentivize a Mexican dray carrier who's trying to get as many trips as he can in a given day to utilize a zero emission vehicle when he crosses over to drop that ship. I just don't know how much control we have over something like that.
Yeah, that's some good points, Tom. I think that we're all struggling with trying to figure out how to incentivize this change. I saw that Alfonso came back with us. I'm just wondering if he had any thoughts on from the trucking side, if it made sense to do, if we could do charging on one side or both sides.
My thought has always been that Tijuana logistic portion of Tijuana and San Diego is one zone. We have to comply under the same rule because the trucks going to Mexico have to return to US and then comply in US to whatever regulation they have or requirement. So it's very important to try to push with equivalent benefits both sides of the border in order to get people to be compliant. The other part that's always on my back of my head is how the compliance percentages are structured. If they top it off at 50 trucks, the amount of companies will multiply because they will present themselves as different companies to kind of loop around the rule. So I think there has to be some sort of ruling that where everybody participates, grants, everybody gets them, consistent with what they stated. As I see the rule, from what I know about it, I am concerned that there's a whole bunch of holes in it to enable people starting and ending in Mexico with trucks to comply. So that's something that I have been kind of consistent saying in whatever meeting I have assisted.
It's good to know. I appreciate that feedback. I hadn't thought about that nuance of how they're going to break up the fleets to comply with the regulations. So it's a good thought.
Yeah,
I have to excuse myself. I have to get into something else. Whatever I can do, I will be in the communication line. Sorry to get out of the meeting at this time. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much, Alfonso. Appreciate your feedback. We'll be in touch if we have any follow-up questions. I did want to probably spend just a minute or two on this for the folks that are in the room, and then I did want to shift gears back to our Caltrans presentation, and I thank you, Jose, for kind of bearing with us here as we get through this. But I think there's probably some interesting comments that you could probably take from this session in relation to the border work here. So there could be some hopefully it's useful. As I'm learning and hearing about some of these logistics the logistics that's going on down there, it kind of strikes me that there's really kind of two key points that I'm taking away from right now, is one of which it sounds like, at least for the space that it sounds like David Wick and his company were leasing, that it sounds like more often than not, there's a potential that some of those trucks may not even be going to warehouses, and that these drop yards are a pretty heavy component of the trucking activity, and potentially a point where you see that interplay between the Mexican trucks and the US trucks, be it through the carrier that may have that space leased, or if they're contracting with each company on either side. It seems like that's kind of, to me, a point that we should potentially look at as, if we were to investigate something that might incentivize, let's say, infrastructure at a drop yard facility potentially, could that potentially provide the necessary avenues for companies on both sides of the border to charge if there was a program there? I wanted to get people's thoughts on that to see if I'm reading that through to see if that might be a potential. Would that help in some way, or is that problematic because these leases? I'm not sure what the length of leases are, I guess, and if those leases would prevent something like that from being installed. So maybe that's more of a question for David and Tom potentially, if that's something that would be amenable, if it's something that I guess you guys would apply for and do, or if that would be something that would be shifted to those leases of that lease yard space.
So Nick, that's spot on. Thank you. We actually have a tenant that is putting chargers in his yard. SDG&E is doing the work and putting them in this tenant's yard. The tenant is Valley Express or an Atlas as well. So we have two tenants that are doing it. And you're right, the leases are short-term, as Tom said. Most of these leases are 3 to 5 years. They're rarely over 3 years, to be honest with you, because the contracts shuffle about every 2-3 years. But it gives an incentive to the tenant, and they obtain our consent to have SDG&E install the chargers in the yard, which is fine. But it gives the tenant the incentive on the contract to renew the contract with the vendor, and because they have this fleet, and they have a way of charging it in the yard. So I see that happening little by little, but out of our 120 some tenants, we only have 2 that are taken up on that program. But what Alfonso said earlier is spot on, is where I've seen in years past. And what I would encourage you, Nick and Kathleen and Randy and the rest of the folks, come to Otay and spend a day or two and see how it works, because there is no other place in the country. I mean, I'm sure it happens in Nogales and Juarez and in El Paso, but the border region is so much different than the rest of the country. And so you need to go down there and really see how this all works on a daily basis. And I would be more than happy, I know Alejandra would be more than happy to help you understand the market. And I'm sure Tom and Caitlin, to show you how it's dynamic, because you have 4,000, 4,500 trucks crossing the border daily. And until you see it firsthand, you can't believe the commerce that's happening. And so there's a lot of discussion. I mean, we're just peeling back the onion a little bit here, but yeah, in the yard having infrastructure, I echo what Tom says, is you need the infrastructure first in order to start doing any program that makes sense, because they need the drivers, the truckers, they need a way to charge, and whether that's in the United States or Mexico. And as Tom said, you need to bring SDG&E to the table, because this is all for naught unless they're intimately involved and they can provide the voltage in that region to have all these chargers. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely helps. We're learning a lot, and we have some familiarity with what goes on down there, just given our past incentive programs, but we can certainly learn more about what's going on in that region. I know we typically go down there for inspections and that sort of thing and have a little flavor of what's going on, but it would be good to know a little bit more, especially as we're crafting and designing a new program potentially. Knowing as much as we can is certainly going to be a huge benefit. So we may take you up on that offer. We may be in touch with you to kind of learn more about that. But great comments. Yeah, these are great comments. I do want to shift gears a little bit But if there's any last remaining comments on this topic, I don't see anybody else's hand raised at this time, but I do want to shift gears, but I do want to thank our folks that were joining us new today, and thank you and appreciate your feedback. And we may be in touch with you offline if we have any follow-up questions. So I do appreciate your time and spending it with us today for us to learn more about what's going on down there. Really appreciate it. Okay, any last minute thoughts before we shift gears to the Caltrans presentation? Okay, so that we'll kind of shift gears back to our Caltrans presentation from Jose Marquez, and let me shift gears as well. So I did just want to quickly introduce the item, and then I'll turn it over to Jose. And I thank you so much, Jose, for hanging with us again and kind of shifting gears at the last second. But this will be Jose and Caltrans is going to be presenting on the Calexico East Port of Entry project that was first introduced by district staff back at our January meeting. Again, for reminders to the group, we're trying to see how a similar kind of project, if that kind of technology was brought to our ports of entry here in Otay Mesa, if something like that could be integrated into a warehouse related regulatory or non-regulatory action that we're exploring as part of this warehouse working group. And so we'd just like to keep that in mind as you're hearing this presentation from Jose, so that we can have some good questions in how it pertains to what we're working on with our projects here in our region. You know, how do we think we can tie these two together? So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Jose.
Oh, thank you, Nick. And before I begin, actually, it was really informative that this conversation, well, the conversation you were having. Now, and actually, we have a couple other efforts that probably we would like to present and include you guys. One of them is we're doing a site assessment in San Diego County and Imperial County to identify potential sites for zero emission infrastructure for commercial vehicles. That's another feasibility study that we're conducting right now. And the other that we're about to start is develop a zero emission mobility strategy with the state of Baja and Baja Sur to develop a policy for zero emissions for transition to zero emission technologies. So that's another effort that we're going to start pretty soon. So maybe so it was good that I heard those conversations, because I was like, I mean, you guys need to be part of that, our efforts as well. So am I going to be sharing the presentation, or how are we going to do that?
Whichever works best for you. I guess we can bring it up on our end, or you can bring it up on your end. I think you should have the ability to share your screen if you wanted to do it on your own, but whatever works best for you.
Okay, let me do just give me a second. Oh, screen to share. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So just give me okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone again. My name is Jose Marquez. I'm a senior transportation planner for the California Department of Transportation, and I oversee our binational freight transportation programs in District 11. And today I'm with Maggie Nugents. She's the project manager of this effort. So we're both, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those to you. So today we're going to be providing an update on our Calexico East Port of Entry Joint Operations System. Okay. This joint operation system will address real-world challenges to our binational community. In 2016, The delays at the California-Baja California border cost the United States and Mexico $3.4 billion in foregone economic output because of the idling of commercial and passenger vehicles, and also produce significant effects in the region's air quality and contributed to the greenhouse emissions. So the proposed project will help mitigate these impacts by providing real-time border and incident information to users, increase the reliability of cross-border freight and passenger vehicles, and fight climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions that are produced from heavy border congestion. In addition, increasing access for cross-border commercial vehicles will promote global competitiveness by creating more reliable and in a multimodal supply chain connecting seaports, rail lines, and warehouses. So the proposed project will increase resiliency along the California and Baja California border by creating a transportation management system that will help these communities to address the congestions at the border. As you know, California shares 7 land ports of entry with Mexico. 3 of these land ports of entry serve commercial vehicle traffic. Those are Otay Mesa, Tecate, and Calexico East. And in 2026, we'll have a 4th commercial port of entry. That will be the Otay Mesa East port of entry. And as you know, northbound commercial truck crossings have grown considerably in the last 20 years. Back in 1996, about 580,000 northbound crossings will cross the border at the California and Baja California border. Now is over 1.5 northbound crossings. So there's over since 1996 to 2023, the amount of trucks across the border have grown 3 times since 1996. And as you know, there's a number of products that cross the border, like audio and medical equipment, aerospace equipment. So there's a lot of interdependencies between California and Baja California. So much that Mexico is the #1 and #2 market for 26 states, and California exports to Mexico about $30 billion over $30 billion, making Mexico its biggest partner to the state of California. I mentioned a couple slides ago that Caltrans, SANDEC, and ICTC, the Imperial County Transportation, we conducted a study to look at the impacts of border delays for both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles, northbound and southbound. And in this study that we have, and I can share the study with you, it was there were 3.4 billion losses of economic impacts per year, and more than 88,000 jobs lost due to border delays. The same study also quantify the impacts, air quality impacts of border delays, and also climate change. And just an example, there's 457 metric tons of CO2 emissions per day due to border delays. So why we selected the Calexico East as part of this pilot? Well, Calexico, the communities of Calexico, El Centro, and Heber, they are an environmental justice community. A couple of years ago, the community wrapped up a community emission reduction plan to address air quality impacts in the communities in these communities. And the purpose of this designation, the AB 617 environmental justice designation, is to address impacts of air quality impacts in environmental justice communities. This concept that I'm presenting today actually is supporting the strategy T1. It's called Border Activity Strategy for the Community Emission Reduction Plan of these communities. This concept, what it's going to do is, like I said, it's going to provide a traffic management system to close the existing communications gap between different elements and different agencies that work at the border. We as we know, there's several agencies that work at the border. Like here in the U.S., we primarily have U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the CHP, the California Highway Patrol, and in Mexico, we have Mexican Aduanas. Those are the main agencies. So we are trying to provide a system that helps communicate the traffic conditions, the current traffic conditions for primarily for these three main agencies. The system will also provide a public emergency notification system. So if there's an emergency, like an accident, we can provide that reliable information to the traveling public. So in doing so, we'll provide more travel choices to both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles. Another important component of this system is to provide a border wait time system. Currently at the border, we don't have, and well, this is a system that we're actually implementing first at OTAI, at the OTAI Mesa Port of Entry, and also our San Isidro Ports of Entry, to provide accurate information of the existing conditions at the border. Right now, most people, when they want to cross the border, they check Facebook groups, they listen to the radio, but none of that information is accurate. So we're deploying a system of Wi-Fi readers where we can actually determine where the extent of the border delays for both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles. The idea is to have this system at all ports of entry and provide this type of information for northbound and southbound, and also for both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles. The appointment system is the component of that is the appointment system. We're using Calexico East as a pilot, and hopefully, if this system is successful, we would like to bring it to other land ports of entry like OTAI Mesa and Tecate. And we are trying to follow the steps that the seaports have. As you know, right now, if you want to access any of the seaport terminals at the ports of LA and Long Beach, you need to have an appointment. And this is the Pier Pass system, and it has its challenges. I mean, we have communication with the Port of LA, and we know that the system is not perfect. So we're looking at their system and to see like what are the elements of that system that we could implement at the border, and what are some of the lessons learned from what the seaports of LA and Long Beach are doing, and what we can, like I said, what can we implement at the border. There's a lot of unknowns right now, so we're just starting this effort. This system, we've been thinking, one of the things that we're doing is reviewing different technologies, reviewing different protocols. Like anything is, we need to really understand like the process and movements of commercial vehicles. I mean, there's some ideas like, well, let's make every single truck that crosses the border to actually have an appointment, and that way we can manage the border traffic better, like kind of like what they do at the seaports of Long Beach and LA. Another alternative it could be is maybe we can have designated special lanes for trucks that make an appointment, and maybe those lanes can also give preferential preference to like zero emission trucks. But those are ideas that we're we're just starting to explore. If this system is successful, it'll be the first in the nation type of applications that we do at land port of entry. Actually, there's a lot of interest, especially from other border states. A couple of weeks ago, I was having a meeting with some other border states like Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and also with our the office of CBP in Washington, D.C., and the Department of Transportation. And they are they're very curious, they're very interested in this type of system. Like I said, we're just starting conversations and developing the system. Last week, we actually met with the private sector in Baja with 4 different organizations in the state of Baja. The Secretary of Economy was very kind, and they set up that meeting for us. And we're going to be having several follow-up meetings with them to hopefully design a system that can that helps primarily serves the private sector, but also address those economic impacts delays and also those air quality impacts. Let's see. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. So here's our contact information. Maggie Nugent, she's the project manager, and I oversee our national and freight planning program.
Great, thank you, Jose. Those are great presentation. Very interesting project that you have in the works here. I did have a question on my end to start us off, and then others can perhaps jump in. But you might have alluded to this in one of the comments, so correct me if I apologize if you already covered it. But are you thinking of this system might have a ZEV truck appointment aspect to it?
We're exploring all of those elements. I cannot say like the system's going to look like that because we're just in the very initial stages of this effort. We're exploring different studying the different protocols, different technologies, and looking at different policies that we can include in the system. So the system, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog.
No worries.
Yeah, there's the system, like I said, it is more than just there is sorry, it's my name. The system is a more complicated, it's a traffic management system. So it has different components. One is the border wait times element, the traffic incident element, and this appointment system. I think the appointment system is this is the first time we're doing something like that for any land port of entry. We don't have appointment system for in any port of entry that I believe that at least not in the Mexican border, but so we're going to be exploring like different ways that we can approach this technologies, protocols, but we would like to, of course, we'd like to have your feedback. Alejandra, I think, has a question.
Oh, thank you, Jose. No, I just wanted to, for this group or APCD, I think, if APCD's interest is to help communities and reduce pollution, I think we should be pushing, and I know we need to wait for the results that Jose has for it to be mandatory. So we don't have like the 3,000 or maybe 1,000 trucks idling if it's optional. So I think everyone should be, hopefully it's successful and should be using the system. And that would really drastically reduce pollution and it would help supply chains. And I guess my question to you, Jose, is And I think it's a really unique opportunity in OTI because I'm assuming if somebody, for whatever reason, is unable to get a quick appointment, then you have OTI 2 as an option, and you can sort of offer that, oh, but you can go to OTI 2 for this fee. I would think, I mean, I think in that sense, maybe the app or whatever technology you use should be related to the alternative of OTI 2. Is that something that, I know you can't do that in Calexico, but something you may want to consider when you're evaluating your program?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things like, there's a lot of unknowns. Like the other one is, what happened with the CTPAT and all of the fast lane users. I mean, we know that so we need to like really understand like all the like challenges for like the regular truck lane for the regular folks that they use the regular lane, the empties, and also for the CTPAT users. So, and the other thing is the enforcement. Like one thing is design the technology. Like, okay, we can like maybe have an app, or like when people down in Baja, they're filling out their paperwork, maybe that can be a feature. That's something that we also consider, like as before they submit their paperwork to aduanas or CBP, as part of that submission, maybe they also submit, and they'll get like an appointment window. But what the things that we also have considering is like, what happens when a truck that doesn't have an appointment just show up at the border? Like, how do we enforce that? Who's going to manage? Like, okay, I mean, you have to go back, or there's and we don't have jurisdiction south of the border. So there's a lot of there's going to be a lot of challenges. That's for sure. Fortunately, we have the participation of Baja in the effort. I mean, especially the economy, the Secretaria, that's the Secretary of Economy of State of Baja, is very involved in this effort, very interested in this effort. But yeah. So any tips, we will encourage them, and like any feedback. Yeah.
The way I visualized it is that CBP would enforce it. I mean, we need their buy-in, and then that way they would enforce it, and they can just return a truck that doesn't have an appointment. I mean, there is a system to return trucks.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you would, I mean, this is just me brainstorming, you would need to give like maybe a priority in appointments to CTPAT users. I mean, that's what they'll want. And I can understand why, because they went through all this security background. And maybe there is when you add the component, if you're also zero emission, well, maybe you add another kind of priority.
Yeah, another priority. Like
But
if
to
you want to
me,
prioritize.
CBP told us they were very open to this. They do have this green trade strategy. So, I mean, I think they're the ones that should be enforcing it.
Oh no, CBP is especially the office in Washington. They're very supportive of this effort, and they would like. And I think every port of entry is going to be a little bit different. Like Alejandro was saying, in a couple of years we're going to have another port of entry commercial. Well, here in the San Diego and Tijuana region, we're going to have 3. The Tecate, I mean, for just some commercial, there's some commercial traffic there, and also we're going to have 2 at OTI. So you're going to have a lot of options. So yeah, we have to look at like how do we manage the traffic, how do you manage the appointments, who's going to enforce it, and how do you actually pay for this system? One thing is to, I mean, we've been really successful at getting some grants for technology equipment, but then is like, how do you, not so much, there's not so many funding sources for the operations and maintenance of this type of equipment. So those are the things that we're trying to look into the study. And yeah, so I don't know if Maggie, is Maggie still there? If she wants to add anything else.
I'm here. No,
Oh,
Jose,
sure.
I think you covered everything. Yeah, I think, like you said, for us, it's important to get feedback, and then ideas, thoughts, especially from industry, you know, from the people that will end up being the users. What impacts and is there any pros and cons to this system?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's different ways, like Alejandro was saying. Alejandro wants to have, and I totally understand your approach. It's kind of like what the Port of LA and doing. Like nobody can get access to the terminal if they don't have an appointment. But we also have heard like, well, why don't we just have a dedicated lane for trucks for appointments? So those are the things that we're going to be studying, and the pros and cons. Or maybe it's going to be this type of system is going to be implemented in phases. Maybe in phase 1 we're just going to have one. Let's say a dedicated lane for and I'm speculating here, and just because this is still in the initial stage. Maybe we will have a dedicated truck lane for appointments, and then in future years, everyone will need to have an appointment to cross the border. Nicholas, Paul.
So, can you kind of clarify when we might be seeing some, I guess, some data on how effective these plans are going? I understand that it's kind of in the early stages, but like, what's the timeline looking on this?
So we're supposed to wrap up our feasibility. Like this is a very preliminary feasibility study in June. And we also are already requesting funds for the next phase of this effort. If we get the funding, I think we can have a what we call in Caltrans the project initiation document for June of next year. But by June of this year, we'll have a preliminary feasibility study.
And I had one follow-up question, Jose, if you'll indulge me. So really two. One is more of a comment. So one of the comments that we got last month when we kind of presented this project and gave some preliminary information about it was a question about if Caltrans would be looking at potential effects from induced demand, I guess, from an appointment system. Meaning, there's a lot of studies that have been done where if you like, the example that I think was given was if you expand the freeway, then it's good. It kind of clears traffic for a short term, but then it eventually the cars come back and there's more pathways for traffic and it increases emissions. One thing I think you may want to think about it within that study is, would an appointment system reduce emissions? It seems like it would reduce emissions in the short term. Long term, I would be curious to see what that might look like, if that's a similar kind of model. And if it could be potentially buoyed by, like we were talking about, if there's zero emission pathways for zero emission truck appointment times, or something along those lines. I think was a comment that we were discussing a little bit at our last meeting.
Well, right now I mean, that's going to be part of the whole process, and especially in the environmental phase of the project, we'll be looking at induced demand aspects. Right now, we're looking at particularly more on the protocols, on the type of technologies, like on different ways that the system could, how much it will cost. So we're in the very preliminary stages. I think once we hit the environmental phase, that's where we're going to be looking at the induced demand.
And is the environmental phase, if I remember right, that's if you get the funding to go to the project initiation document? Is that when the environmental phase hits?
That's going to be after the project initiation document.
Got it. Okay. So we're still talking probably some years out.
Some years out. Yes.
Okay. Got it. I used to work at Caltrans, but only for like a year and a half. So I know enough to be really dangerous, but
very dangerous.
I was trying to remember what that process was like. So yeah, this is definitely early on. So.
And Nick, just to comment on the question you mentioned that I wasn't in the last meeting of the demand growing because of the wait time. I think it's really based on really the perishable industry in Baja and the manufacturing industry. As nearshoring increases, really there's only one way to cross products across the US-Mexico border, and it's by truck. I mean, obviously if the rail system gets in place, then we would have an alternative, but really the demand is only based on that. I mean, you can't, there's not going to be an additional product that is going to go and be crossed along the border just because there's no wait time. And it's It's just really based on how many companies are being established in Mexico, and that is only going up. So I think it's a little different than the concept of the freeway, because we as travelers have, go on trips on so many different reasons. I don't know how you would model that, Jose, but I think it's a very different phenomenon.
Well, now that you talked the rail, that's another project that I have is we are actually going to be doing a feasibility study that is going to look into bringing the Desert Line back into services. So what the Desert Line is a short rail line between California and Baja California. So our study is what it's gonna do is determine, well, primarily how much it's gonna cost us if we bring back 70 miles of rail line that has been abandoned, and there's dozens of bridges and tunnels throughout that line. So it's probably gonna cost a lot of money to bring that rail services back. And then another aspect of that study is going to be looking if there are market demand, and what also the benefits to the state is to move and shift the commercial crossings from trucks to rail. And that's another study that we're going to be I'm reviewing consulting proposals this week, so for that study. So that's another effort that we're working on.
Yeah, I imagine that will be something APCD, I was going to say Caltrans. That I'm sure you're involved in it. I'm sure APCD would be interested in learning and getting involved with that process too, because we'd have some thoughts on that as well. And I do want to shift gears probably to our next topic here, but I did want to just pose this extra question to the group in trying to see how do we think that this project, if it comes to fruition in Calexico, and if we could potentially bring a similar model over to the Otay Mesa area, or San Ysidro, or both, what do we think that might look like in terms of connecting the dots between that kind of a project to our warehouse efforts here in San Diego County? And, is there some interplay in terms of that connection? Is it something like, if there was a warehouse rule, if there was a connection between, a company participating in this PurePass system, which you said, Jose, could be a potential model that, could be adopted within this pilot study, is it something that, a company with a PurePass system might have to do more or less, more than likely, in terms of complying with the rulemaking for like a warehouse ISR? I'm kind of posing that to the group, not necessarily to you, Jose, but just kind of trying to see how we can connect the dots between something like that system that could come online to what we're also talking about with reducing warehouse-related emissions.
And sorry, Nick, but I didn't raise my hand, but to me, I think the APCD instead of a warehouse tax or rule, I think the priority in terms of an ISR should be helping Jose accelerate this project and implementing it in Otay, because I think, I don't know how you measure this, but I think it's clear that the pollution would be drastically reduced when this is operational versus the system that I guess is being implemented in the Inland Empire that you're considering. If there's some way to measure that, I think you will, to me, my common sense says that this will be much more effective. So I understand you're asking how you tie the two together, but I see it a little differently. Like, we should be all trying to accelerate this instead of the other, because it's much more effective and everyone wins. That's just
understood. Thank you for that. Thank you for Alejandra. That's good feedback there, and that could be on the table. We're not, that's part of what we're doing as part of this working group, is seeing what options are available to us, and this is certainly a viable option that we could think about. Is there any other feedback or thoughts on that? I see Craig Benedetto concurs with Alejandra's comments, and then I see Nicholas Powell with his hand up. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, emphasize that ISR isn't limited to the border region, right? And so, I think you know, we're kind of talking about, you know, what the potential ramifications are in the border region specifically. But, you know, this rule has the potential to improve air quality throughout the county. And so, you know, I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. I think it's possible to support Jose and Caltrans in their efforts to reduce emissions from cross-border trucks and traffic. But again, I think the conversation about ISR is not limited to the border region. And so, yeah, just want to make sure that maintains kind of at the forefront of the conversation.
Great, thank you, Nicholas. Appreciate the comment. I see Caitlin had a comment. She agreed with Alejandra. And Andrew, I see your hand raised. Go for it.
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, so I wanted to first, you know, agree with Alejandra's comment that as far as I can tell from kind of the data mining that I've been doing that you're familiar with, Nick, that it would seem that the incremental benefits of making sure that traffic crosses smoothly across the border is going to have a greater reduction on emissions than, say, you know, a smaller percentage or a slightly increasing percentage of those vehicles becoming ZEVs, right? Because you were just talking time at the border at this point. But so I would be leaning more towards encouraging, you know, and accelerating that sort of study to see how that could be implemented here in other parts across the border. And to Nick's point about applying it, you know, broadly across the county, I think that the difficult part is, again, like we had touched on with casting our net as to, well, what all are we calling warehouses, or what all are we going to be considering as part of the rule, and does that exclude Costco's and Walmart's and big box stores? So it's trying to find that fine balance between what's actually enforceable and also effective and measurable. So we need to keep all of that in mind. And as far as I can tell, implementing any kind of system that can help facilitate those vehicles crossing the border and not having to idle would probably move the needle more. And that's just my knee jerk off of the data that I'd been looking at over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Andrew. Okay, I think we're probably at a time, and I know we probably kept Jose longer than he was expecting today. So I do want to be respectful of his time. But we can certainly continue to discuss this offline as well. But thank you, Jose and Maggie, for joining us today. And the project looks really interesting. And is it okay if we touch base with you maybe in a couple months as your feasibility study progresses?
Yeah.
See how that goes.
Yeah, most definitely. And also, we'll be happy to share information on the other efforts that we have, like the zero emission strategy that we're gonna do with the state of Baja and Baja California Sur, and also the site assessment that we're doing for commercial vehicles, and that's another feasibility study, or the desert line. We're about to start that one, but so we have several, I think, efforts that complement what you guys want to do.
Certainly, we'll be in touch, and we can share any information that you like through this forum as well. If there's something that would be of interest to this group, you know, we can certainly facilitate that. So appreciate your time and being with us today and sharing this interesting information about this project.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I do want to now switch gears to our last item, which is an item that we wanted to bring to people's attention, which is a video that was put together by South Coast AQMD in relation to truck trip visits. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Randy, who will be introducing the item. And then I think we'll go ahead and get the presentation back up, which has the video kind of embedded in it. And just fair warning, this will be kind of the first time we're going to be playing a video during the presentation. We're not sure if the audio is going to completely work right, especially in relation to the interpretation channels. So just bear with us. We're hoping to get the English audio working at a minimum. And we can certainly we can post a link to this. I'll in the chat, I'll go ahead and post a link to it while we're going so people could review it on their own if we have trouble. But Randy, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nick. As Nick mentioned, the final part of today's presentation is South Coast AQMD's training video for truck trip counting for WarePoint's compliance obligation in accordance with the requirements of their Warehouse Rule 2305. The video is being shown today for informational purposes to illustrate an example of some requirements in a warehouse ISR. The video will go over how the WarePoint's compliance obligation is calculated and some methods that may be used for counting trucks. The video is about 7 minutes long, and there will be time for discussion following the video. So with that, if you could please play the video.
All right, here goes nothing. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we'll give it a try. So far, not exciting. Yeah.
Not sure we're hearing audio on our end. Can anybody else hear the audio?
All right.
Okay.
Not sure how to share audio on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Let me try one other thing. I have.
Oh, hang on. There's an option to share sound. Let's try again.
Warehouse operators need to count
Oh, there we go.
in order to calculate their WarePoint compliance obligation, or WPCO. Their WPCO is determined by the weighted annual truck trips, or WATTs, the stringency, and the annual variable. Truck trip counts are used to determine the WATTs. More information on this calculation is discussed in training video number 1. Warehouse operators also need to count truck trips to complete their initial site information report, or ISIR, and their annual WARE report. Both of these reports need to include the WPCO, which is calculated based on the number of truck trips. The ISIR includes an estimate of the WPCO required for the annual WARE report, which is due after the ISIR. This calculation is not binding. The WPCO calculated for the annual WARE report is binding. This calculation can be completed within the WARE user calculator, which is available on our website, aqmd.gov/ware. Earning WARE points for near zero emission and zero emission truck visits will be covered in a separate training video. A truck trip is a truck or tractor entering or leaving a warehouse site. One trip entering, another trip leaving. Truck trips count from Class 2B through 7 and Class 8 trucks of any powertrain type, including diesel, near zero emission, and zero emission engines. Truck trip counts will need to differentiate between Class 2B through 7 and Class 8 trucks. This is necessary for the WATTs calculation needed to determine the WPCO. For truck trip counting, warehouse operators do not need to collect information on the powertrain type. They only need to determine if a truck is a Class 2B through 7 or Class 8. A Class 8 truck is considered a tractor or tractor trailer, and a Class 2B through 7 truck is considered a straight truck. Warehouse operators will need 12 months of truck trip data for the ISIR, and will need truck trip data through the end of each compliance period for the annual WARE report. Keep in mind that for warehouses greater than or equal to 250,000 square feet, truck trip counts should begin now in order to collect 12 months worth of truck trip data. Truck trip counts are due based on warehouse size and first compliance period, as shown here. The ISIR is a one-time report due in July of the first compliance period. Keep in mind, for the ISIR, the reporting period has some flexibility on the exact days, as long as 12 months worth of data is collected. For instance, it's okay to report from, say, June 3rd to June 2nd of the following year, as this still adds up to 12 months worth of data. The annual WARE report is due later, on January 31st after the first compliance period. It is due every year on January 31st, starting based on the first compliance period. For the annual WARE report, truck trip counts are required from January 1st through December 31st of every compliance period. These dates are not flexible. Please note that the earliest due dates are for warehouses that are greater than or equal to 250,000 square feet. Their first compliance period is 2022, their ISIR is due July 1st, 2022, and their first annual WARE report is due July 31st, 2023. Here is a very simplified example of the truck trip data needed for the ISIR. It may help warehouse operators to keep track of truck trip accuracy and time if truck trips are collected on a routine schedule monthly or quarterly. Depending on what a warehouse operator has at their warehouse, they may need to track fleet data, fuel charging data, and/or yard truck data for the ISIR. This data will be required for a 12-month period prior to the ISIR due date. Please see Rule 2305, Section E, 2, C through E for more information. Now I will discuss examples of how to count truck trips. Warehouse operators must keep records of truck trips that include the date and time of the truck trips, must be verifiable and representative, and must differentiate between Class 2B through 7 and Class 8 trucks. Truck trips must be counted daily, or may be extrapolated from a representative peak period. South Coast AQMD does not prefer or endorse any method in particular. I will present here some examples of methods warehouse operators could potentially use. One method of counting truck trips is using an electronic telematic system or onboard GPS system in a truck to track when a particular truck enters or leaves a warehouse. In-roadway or driveway sensors are another option, which count when a truck passes a certain point, such as a warehouse driveway. Video monitoring may be convenient for warehouse operators, particularly at warehouses that already use security cameras to monitor their gates. Representative peak period sampling may be useful specifically for this method, as described here. See the WARE Implementation Guidelines, page 4, for more information on how to conduct representative peak sampling. The WARE Implementation Guidelines are available on our website, aqmd.gov/ware. An employed guard could collect proof of truck trips. Like video monitoring, using representative peak sampling instead of daily counts could be useful for this method. See the WARE Implementation Guidelines, page 4, for more information. Again, the WARE Implementation Guidelines are available on our website, aqmd.gov/ware. Truck trips can be counted from records that document all loads that are delivered or picked up at a warehouse. Finally, there may be other methods that could be used to count truck trips, as long as they are verifiable, representative, and differentiate between Class 2B through 7 and Class 8 trucks. Again, South Coast AQMD does not endorse or prefer any particular method. Please see here for our contact information, including WARE program email, WARE program hotline, and WARE program compliance website. Also, consider signing up for our WARE program compliance listserv to receive compliance-related updates.
All right, great. So at this point in time, we just wanted to provide that short video for context and set up, any additional thoughts or questions related to it. The reason why we wanted to bring that to everybody's attention was mostly in relation to the counting of the truck visits and how AQMD provided some examples of how that's done. Clearly, that's in relation to their specific rule that they have adopted. But we thought that information was at least useful for the benefit of this group to potentially look at, answering that question about how does one go about tracking truck visits. And we thought it was useful to know that, at least from AQMD's perspective, there's a lot of different ways that seemingly can be done. And with what we are looking at, either from a regulatory or non-regulatory approach, some counting of truck trips we're thinking will have to happen at some level to be able to know what kind of facilities are either going to be applicable if a rulemaking, moves ahead, or if there's an incentive program aspect. So with that, we just wanted to set up with the question, then we'll get a couple minutes of feedback. Knowing that this is kind of how AQMD looks at how they track truck visits, are there any concerns that you might have in being able to potentially do that? Is this different from what you were expecting? Any feedback like that would be great. I do see Craig Benedetto comments saying that the video highlights logistical difficulties in doing that, particularly as you push down to the smaller facilities, and that is true. I would agree that there is some logistical difficulties. There are some avenues it seems like that we were unaware of, I think, until we watched that video, about the different ways that you could potentially still accommodate that kind of level of tracking. I think one of the examples that we heard in the video was, there might be a way to accommodate some of that tracking over a shortened period of time, be it for a peak period, and then you could extrapolate that over a period of time. That was one aspect that I think wasn't really highlighted in the slides, but was kind of verbally mentioned in the video. So there was a couple of nuggets in that video that might be worth taking a look at later on, that second or third time they start to come out a little bit. But understood the comment, Craig, that either way there's going to be some logistical difficulties, and especially for the smaller facilities to track that. Let's see, I've got two hands up. I've got Caitlin first and then Alejandra.
Hi, we've developed a few million square feet in Otay, and I would say out of those, only about 2 different buildings and or projects have had guard shacks, one of which is about a 650,000 square foot campus that has 3 buildings with multiple tenants. That guard shack is checking people in for multiple businesses. So if you're trying to tax back to the business, again, like this, there could be some logistical difficulties. And then there's plenty of buildings that do not have any guard shack whatsoever, but they would probably have a log as to who's coming in and out. That was, I know, one of the ways to track everything, but it's just sometimes it's the level of sophistication. So, and I also kind of had a question, remind me, I know they had warehouses 100,000 square feet and above. Is that the same size that we're thinking of here? I can't remember if we're going smaller than that.
It's to be determined at this point. I mean, the direction that we got from our board was to, back in, it's about a year ago, I guess, was to at least look at warehouses of smaller size range, given that San Diego does have quite a few warehouses smaller than 100,000 square feet. So that was one direction our board wanted us to investigate. So again, we're not really sure at this point in time if we would proceed with the rulemaking or not. That's part of what we're doing here in this group, is to figure out what solution works best here. But smaller warehouses is something we're going to be investigating, either from a regulatory or non-regulatory side of things. Alejandra.
No, I also wanted to make the point about, at least in Otay, there are not a lot of companies, like Caitlin said, that had security guards already, like the video is assuming. And the other option they propose in terms of the GPS on the trucks, I mean, that's the challenge here, where the trucking company is not many times not associated to the warehouse they're going to, so that they don't even have, the warehouse does not have access to that GPS system. So it's a very unique situation, and it doesn't look like that model at all would be good for OTI. It would just create a significant financial burden for businesses, was my point. So like David was saying, you really would need to dive into OTI and get to know it. I mean, I know you have all of San Diego County, but I mean, we are a unique region and that would certainly not work for us. And I don't think it would be effective anyway.
I don't think there's a lot of, I don't think guard shacks are very common, particularly, in like central, it depends on the business, but it's, but people know how to track their trucks. It just, not everybody can provide the same level of information, I think.
Caitlin, you mentioned that they do track their trucks. So how are they? I mean, it sounds like it varies based on the level of.
Yeah, I can't speak for the entire industry. I know that on a clipboard, you know what I mean? Like some of it, it's just checking somebody in and out for a delivery for the day. It's not like being entered into a computer necessarily, but really, really depends on the level of sophistication for the business. It can be very raw data. It could be, highly monitored, but that's going to vary.
Understood. Yep. And one thing that I got, and I could be incorrect in watching that video, is it seems like, at least from the level of documentation that AQMD might get from companies that are having to comply with their regulation, it seems like they're at least able to have some flexibility in what level of detail might come in, which I frankly was thinking that they had to, from my perspective, have probably a little bit more detailed data in terms of, truck year and truck, engine type, a lot of different things that they might have to track. And really, it doesn't, to me, that wasn't really the case. I was kind of struck by that in watching the video the first time. They're kind of tracking it and more along the lines of, well, if this is a, 3-axle tractor versus a 2-axle tractor, then that might be all the information that they need in some ways. As long as they can figure out how many times that thing is going in and out, they might be able to capture that in some way. So it's really, we're just kind of using it as food for thought for this exercise and what we're doing here with this group. But we thought it was interesting enough to bring to the group to potentially see how AQMD is looking at that, at least from their perspective of what does it take to track truck visits, because it's a common concern that we've heard in the past since we've been tracking separate. So
Nick, can I ask you something?
Sure.
Now that you were saying about the detail and the type of motor, has that particular district or even APCD, have you looked into all the information that truckers in this region are already providing to CARB? And have you looked at sharing that information instead of creating this additional burden for companies to provide it?
We certainly have an idea of the truck emissions makeup of the region wide as a whole. That is something that we do have access to, that kind of information kind of on a global perspective for the region. We could certainly bring that information to the group and potentially the projections that we're seeing over time using CARB's assumptions.
Maybe I wasn't clear. I guess if CARB is already requesting so much information from the other trucking companies that are in California, but I'm assuming they know if they're in San Diego, the ones that are working in San Diego, instead of having a separate report to the APCD, have you considered, or is the district in San Bernardino, wherever, are they cooperating with CARB to share that information, or are they just creating this additional layer for businesses to do a separate reporting to them?
Yeah, my understanding is it's a separate effort, that I don't believe there's information sharing happening between CARB and AQMD to kind of connect the dots between, trucking company X that needs to comply with a CARB regulation as well as Rule 2305 at AQMD. I don't believe that's the case. We can follow up with our CARB folks offline to see if that is true, but that's my understanding. Is they're kind of two different aspects. Doesn't mean that potentially can't happen. So might be something we have to further investigate.
Got it. No, I was just thinking if that information is already in a reporting format with CARB, maybe they can share it with you and you have the information. And maybe you can consider that calculator that I put on earlier. If companies are already doing that kind of a tracking, pollution wise, maybe that's something maybe that's a better option. Maybe that's easier for the companies to track versus the number of truck trips. I don't know.
Yeah, Alejandra, I think we would have to look at the specificity of that data in those other reporting systems. We would really need to look at really specific truck trips to specific warehouses. And I don't think that that level of reporting is happening with CARB. I don't know if it is with EPA for that GHG calculator. We'll take a look at that and see. But it certainly would be nice to be able to at least piggyback off of that reporting and not have to gather, you know, if they have truck data and we're just looking at trip data, for example, that might be a way to simplify the reporting. We'll take a look at it for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Any last closing thoughts? I know we're at 5 o'clock. Any last comments about the video in particular? If not, I would encourage everyone to maybe, I posted the link in the chat for anyone who wants to go back and review it. Because the staffer at AQMD kind of talked a little fast. I had to watch it 2 or 3 times myself to kind of grasp certain things that they were putting in there. But I would encourage everyone to take another look at it if you can. We'll certainly bring any other potentially useful you know, videos like that. If there's some applicability to what we're doing here, we can certainly bring them again. So I think we're pretty much at time here, so we're not going to have any non-agenda or participant comments today. But I think as far as the next meeting goes, our next meeting is March 4th at 3 o'clock. We are not quite sure what we're going to be speaking about quite yet, but we are looking at some ideas about going back to some directives that our board gave us about a year ago again, about and looking at our timeline that we had put together and trying to see if we can hit what we can promise that we promised to the board, and possibly investigate some things like how do we prioritize disadvantaged communities and EJ communities as part of this effort. That was one directive that we got from the board that we have spoken a little bit at the early outsets of this working group about, but we do want to circle back and now that we've had some sessions under our belt to try and see what does that look like in terms of these programs, these regulatory and non-regulatory programs that we might be developing. So that could be on the agenda for the next meeting. And as a reminder, notifications are going to be sent to those subscribed on our warehouse working group email service. So please do sign up for that if you haven't already. We'll probably be sending an email out in the next couple of days just to ask about potential needs for translation services and live interpretation at the next meeting. So be on the lookout for that. And the next meeting will occur again on March 4th. And with that, I will go ahead and close the meeting out. Our contact information is on the next slide if you need it for me and Randy. And you're welcome to get a hold of us at any time, but we do appreciate your time and effort and really appreciate all the good feedback that we got today. That was really informative. So thank you again to everyone, and hopefully everybody stays dry. Thank you, everyone.